The vote had been decided before I opened my eyes that morning. I knew it the way you know a storm is coming, not from any single sign, but from the accumulated weight of small things. The way the Kiriti delegation had stopped meeting my gaze 3 weeks ago. The way the Orion moderator's voice had shifted from neutral to careful. The way the translation matrix hesitated on certain words now, as if even the machines had learned to be uncomfortable. My name is Elias Vaughn. I had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Concord for 14 years. 14 years of chambers that smelled of recycled copper, of food that tasted like warm metal, of smiles directed at species whose faces could not smile back. I had negotiated ceasefires, brokered trade routes, and once spent 11 hours in a pressure-sealed room convincing a Velhari elder that humans were not, in fact, intentionally poisoning their water supply, just ignorant of a specific enzyme sensitivity. That was the job. Smile, wait, explain, endure. Today, the job was finished. Resolution 9 Theta had been crafted with surgical precision. Not by me. By the Kiriti, specifically by Senior Coordinator Vexel Moore, a being with 7 limbs and the patience of a glacier. She had spent 5 years building this vote, calling in favors, rewriting clauses, reframing humanity not as an enemy but as a variable. A destabilizing variable. The kind you remove from an equation not out of malice, but for the sake of cleanliness. The chamber on Verus Prime rose 600 meters above the floor. Bioluminescent panels pulsed a calm, satisfied blue. 412 species sat in their gravity-adjusted seats, watching me. The display above the moderator's platform showed the results: 398 green lights. 1 red. Mine. The resolution passes, said Moderator Velis, her voice flat through the translation matrix. The Concord recognizes Earth's position as the sole dissenting voice. Does Earth accept the Council's decision? I looked at Vexel Moore. Her upper limbs were positioned at exactly the angle that, in Kiriti culture, means this is already finished. She was right. It was finished. I gathered my notes. I closed the folder. I set my pen down, a cheap plastic one I had brought from Earth 14 years ago, the ink long dried. Then I stood. I did not speak. I pushed back my chair, and I walked toward the exit. The chamber went silent. 400 species, 6,000 years of collective civilization, watching one human being walk out of a room. I did not look back. The doors closed behind me. The corridor was empty. My communicator buzzed. "Ambassador," said my aide. "What happened?" "Resolution passed." "Did you say anything before you left?" "No." The silence on his end lasted 6 seconds. "Sir," he said carefully, "every threat assessment system in this building just went active." I looked out the corridor window at Verus Prime's pale amber sky. "I know," I said. "Send the recall signal. We're closing the embassy tonight." I ended the call before he could answer. Behind me, through the thick chamber walls, I imagined 400 delegations staring at one empty chair. They had spent 5 years building a resolution to remove us. They had not spent a single day thinking about what happened if we simply agreed to go. I stood there a moment longer, breathing air that tasted like copper. Then I turned and walked away from the grandest political building in the galaxy, feeling, for the first time in 14 years, perfectly calm. The recall signal reached the fleet 12 hours later. I know this because I was standing on the bridge of the Endurance when it arrived. My name is Admiral Helena Cross. I have commanded the first human expeditionary fleet for 6 years, 14 warships, 9 support vessels, and a mobile dry dock that we built ourselves in a region the Concord classified as unremarkable 3 generations ago. The message was brief. No explanations. No strategic guidance. Just 4 words: close the embassy. Come home. I read it twice. Then I called my senior staff to the briefing room. Lieutenant Mira Voss, my comms officer, was the first to speak. "Admiral, the Tanith Relay Junction. We've been maintaining it for 2 years. If we pull out..." "If we pull out," I said, "it goes dark." "I know." Commander Elias Petrov, my exec, was doing the quiet calculation I had seen him do 100 times. His face was calm, but his fingers tapped against the table in a rhythm I had learned to recognize. "Concern. The Velhari agricultural platforms," he said. "The ones we built. 11% of their food supply across 4 systems. I know. The Orion Weather Array. The Sarath Medical Station. The Kiriti Translation Archive. I know all of it. I looked around the table. We have 48 hours to recall every human asset from Concord-adjacent space. That means the advisors, the engineers, the medical staff, the maintenance crews. Every single one. We go dark on all Concord frequencies. No responses, no hails, no automated handshakes. Nothing. Lieutenant Voss's hand stopped over her console. They'll notice. They'll notice, I agreed, when things stop working. The next 30 hours were a blur of checklists and departure codes. I watched our embedded teams report in one by one, from the Velhari moon station, from the Orion Waterworld, from the Kiriti research outpost that had been running on human-maintained life support for 11 years. Each departure was quiet, orderly, professional. Each one left behind a gap that no one else knew how to fill. On the 31st hour, a Kiriti patrol vessel moved into hailing range. Their commander's voice was careful, almost delicate. Admiral Cross, we are seeking clarification on your fleet's current status. We have noted the withdrawal of human personnel from several key locations. We are concerned. I looked at her image on the display, 7 limbs, compound eyes catching the light. She was afraid. She did not know it yet, but I could see it in the angle of her upper limbs. The same angle Vexel Moore had used in the chamber. This is already finished. I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. We are executing standard redeployment, I said. Thank you for your inquiry. I cut the channel. Then I gave the order every commander dreads and every commander secretly hopes for. All units. Execute dark protocol. No communications on Concord frequencies. No responses to any hails. We are now silent. The fleet went dark. And across the galaxy, the Concord began to notice what they had voted away. The first report arrived on day 4. A minor infrastructure note buried in the evening summary. 3 agricultural platforms in the Cygni belt had ceased transmission. The human crews had departed. The Velhari, who owned the platforms, dispatched their own technicians. They arrived to find everything in order, shut down properly, equipment logged, manuals on the console. The problem was simple. The manuals were in English. The equipment required calibration protocols that only the human crew had memorized. The Velhari technicians stood in the empty station for 9 hours before filing a report that used the word unsustainable 3 times. I read that report on day 7. By then, the list was growing. The Tanith Relay Junction, offline. The Orion Weather Array, transmitting garbage data. The Sarath Medical Station, transferring patients to a facility 9 hours away that lacked postoperative intensive care capabilities. Each item was small. Each one, by itself, was an inconvenience. Together, they formed a pattern that the Concord had no framework for understanding. On day 12, Coordinator Vexel Moore requested a private channel. I declined. On day 15, she requested again. I declined again. On day 18, she arrived in person, her ship dropping out of transit at the edge of the Veil, a region the Concord had surveyed a century ago and classified as empty. She hailed me on an old secondary frequency. Admiral Cross, I am here to understand what humanity wants. I looked at her image on the display. 7 limbs. Compound eyes. The posture of someone who had spent 5 years building a vote and was now realizing she had not accounted for the aftermath. What we want, I said, is what we've always wanted. To be seen. To be counted. To have the work acknowledged before we have to stop doing it to get your attention. Her upper limbs shifted. That same angle. This is already finished. But now it meant something different. Show me, she said. I looked at my executive officer. Commander Petrov nodded. On the display behind me, the veil opened. 4 terraformed worlds, 41 million people, shipyards and farms and hospitals, and a power grid that had been built in absolute silence over 91 years. The survey had said empty. The survey had been wrong. Vexel Moore looked at the image. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke 4 words that I knew would change everything. We did not know. She stayed for 3 days. Vexel Moore, the architect of our removal, walked through the Vale's terraformed worlds with the careful stillness of someone whose internal model of reality had cracked and was still settling into new shapes. I walked with her. Not as a guide, she had her own aids for that, but as a witness. Someone needed to remember what this moment looked like. On the second day, we stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, looking out at the shipyards. 3 corvettes were in various stages of construction. The workers moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this work their entire lives. None of them looked up. None of them knew who Vexel Moore was. To them, she was just another alien visitor, one of many who had begun arriving since the silence ended. "You built all of this while we were watching your diplomatic sessions," she said. "Not a question. While you were watching us argue about fishing rights and border disputes, yes." I leaned against the railing. "We learned something early on. The Concord pays attention to the loudest voice in the room. So we gave you a loud voice. We argued. We objected. We filed amendments. We kept you looking at the table. And while you looked at the table, we built." Her upper limbs shifted through a sequence I had learned to read as discomfort. Not fear. Something closer to the feeling of realizing you have been solving the wrong problem for 5 years. "The atmospheric processor on our third moon," she said slowly. "The one your people operated for 22 years. It was not a commercial contract. No. It was leverage." I turned to face her. "It was work. Useful work that needed doing. We did it. We never threatened to stop. We never demanded recognition. We just did it, quietly, for decades, because that is what we do." I paused. "The fact that you built your entire infrastructure on that work without noticing, that was your choice, not our strategy." She was quiet for a long time. Below us, the shipyards hummed with activity. A new corvette's engines fired for the first time, lighting the darkness with a brief blue flare. "Ambassador Vaughn walked out of the chamber without a word," she said finally. "That was not surrender." "It was the opposite of surrender," I said. "It was the moment we stopped pretending the table was fair. The silence after that, the fleet going dark, the withdrawals, the unanswered hails, that was not a tactic. It was us finally showing you what you had been ignoring." She looked at me with all 4 of her eyes. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we negotiate. Not from weakness. Not from performative strength. From the quiet certainty of people who have already built what they need and do not require permission to exist." On the third day, she left. Her ship carried a single message back to the Concord. "We need to talk. Properly." The negotiations took 9 months. Not because the terms were complex. They were simple, brutal in their clarity. Recognition. Restoration. A permanent seat at the table. A new clause in the Concord Charter requiring infrastructure dependency reviews before any future expulsion vote. The Kiriti resisted. The Velhari hesitated. The Orions asked for more time. But every day, the list of things no longer working grew longer. Every day, another system went quiet. Every day, the empty seat in the chamber became harder to ignore. Vexel Moore signed the agreement on a cool morning at the Vale's central habitat. Her upper limbs trembled slightly as she pressed them to the document. She did not look at me. She looked at Ambassador Elias Vaughn, who had returned from Earth for this moment, who stood with the same calm stillness he had carried out of the Concord chamber 14 months ago. "You planned this," she said. "Not an accusation. An observation." "We planned to survive," Vaughn said. "There is a difference." The document began with 3 words. I had insisted on them. Vexel Moore had fought against them for 6 weeks before finally conceding. The words were simple, undeniable, and they changed everything. We were wrong. The Concord ratified the agreement 6 days later. The vote was unanimous. The empty seat was filled. The fleet came in from the dark, not as conquerors, not as saviors, simply as people returning to a place that had finally agreed to see them. I stood on the bridge of the Endurance as the first human diplomatic vessel in over a year docked at Varus Prime. Ambassador Vaughn walked through the same chamber doors he had walked out of, past the same delegations, past the same bioluminescent panels that now glowed a quiet, uncertain gold. He took his seat. He opened his folder. He set down a new pen. Moderator Velis looked at him. Ambassador Vaughn, does Earth accept the Concord's revised terms? He looked slowly around the room, at the Kiriti, at the Velhari, at the Orions, at the 400 species who had voted to erase humanity and now sat in silence. He thought about the Veil, about the fleet that had gone dark, about the quiet work of 91 years finally given a name. Earth accepts, he said, on one condition. The chamber held its breath. From this day forward, the Concord maintains a permanent record, not of treaties signed or votes cast, of work done, of infrastructure maintained, of lives sustained by hands that were not thanked. The next time you consider removing a species, you will first read what they actually built while you were watching something else. Vexel Moore rose from her seat. Her upper limbs moved through a sequence that the translators rendered as agreement, but that I later learned meant something closer to "we have learned the cost of not looking." The motion passed. No dissent. I watched from the Endurance as the feed cut. Then I turned to Commander Petrov. Set course for the Veil. We have work to do. He smiled. We always do. The fleet turned. Behind us, the Concord chamber glowed gold. Ahead, the quiet stars of home. We had left in silence. We returned in recognition. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, the next species the Concord would underestimate was already building something no one had thought to look for. We hoped someone would count them before it was too late. Years passed. The Concord did not forget. They built new protocols, new dependency reviews, new safeguards. But more than that, they built something unexpected: curiosity. Delegations began visiting the Veil not to inspect, but to learn. Engineers from a dozen species came to study the power grid, the shipyards, the water reclamation systems that had run without failure for decades. They asked questions. The humans answered. Slowly, quietly, the relationship shifted from transaction to collaboration. Elias Vaughn retired to a small house on one of the Veil's terraformed worlds. He grew vegetables. He walked the ridges at sunset. He kept the cheap plastic pen from his first posting in a glass case above his desk. Sometimes young diplomats came to visit, and he would tell them the story, not as a victory, but as a warning. Do good work, he would say. Put your name on it. And never assume the table is fair just because everyone else seems comfortable. Admiral Helena Cross commanded the fleet for another decade, then passed the role to Lieutenant Mira Voss, who had learned silence and patience in the dark years and would carry them forward. The Endurance remained in service, its hull scarred but steady, its engines still burning with the stolen fire of 1,000 dead stars. And the Concord? It changed. Not overnight. Not completely. But the empty seat in the chamber became a memorial, not of absence, but of possibility. Every new species that joined was shown the document that began with "We were wrong." Every ambassador was told the story of the humans who had walked out and built a home in the dark and returned not with weapons, but with receipts. I think about that often. The receipts. The records. The quiet accumulation of work that no one bothered to count until it stopped. The galaxy is old and vast and full of species who have learned to look away. But somewhere, in every generation, someone decides to look. Someone decides to count. Someone decides that the table can be rebuilt, that the silence can be broken, that the work matters even when no one is watching. We are still here. We are still building. And we are still, always, putting our names on it.